In the capital city of the Scottish Highlands, anger and anxiety were on display. Since the Home Office announced plans to house 300 male asylum seekers in local barracks, tensions been building here, spilling over now into protest.
Across Britain, people have sensed a shift they couldn't quite name. Small gatherings outside former barracks, extra police vans appearing earlier each evening, veterans speaking with a tone that suggested something heavier was building. It felt like pressure rising in places already stretched thin, but no one knew what would finally push it over the edge. That moment came with a leaked government warning, claiming current pressures were tearing the United Kingdom apart. Within hours, veterans mobilised and 300,000 people marched toward Barracks Gate. They weren't reacting to a headline, they were reacting to a breaking point. And if the pressure has climbed high enough for trained soldiers to leave their homes en masse, then the question isn't whether it reaches the public next, but how soon.
Have been lining the streets this morning to protest against the government's plans to temporarily house asylum seekers in a local training camp, Wilden District Council.
The barracks that became a battleground of trust. These gates were designed to keep people safe. Decades ago, the purpose was clear: train the willing, house the enlisted, prepare for the worst. In recent years, the signs changed. Barracks that once drilled regiments now host men who fled different wars. Napier in Kent, Penally in Wales, other names less known to those who have never lived under their shadow. Official explanations use words like secure, controlled and logistically efficient. Inside the communities that surround these sites, those words landed with a different weight. Secure for whom? Controlled by whom? Efficient at what cost? Reports mounted. Inspectors described dormitories too cold in winter and too crowded year-round. Outbreaks of illness, windows that rattled in wind, long corridors where men waited for answers that did not come. Human rights lawyers argued that the accommodation failed basic standards. Local authorities wrote to ministers about clinics over capacity, schools already full, and council budgets stretched until they creaked. Charities said the locations made integration harder and fear easier. Police commanders, who are trained to speak with restraint, began to talk about being caught between residents afraid inside and residents angry outside. None of this was theoretical. At facilities and hotels across the map, there were nights when lines wavered and vans burned and windows broke. There were also nights when neighbours stood between a crowd and a door, insisting that no one be dragged out for something they did not do. The truth is that communities know how to be generous, but generosity collapses when it's asked to carry everything without warning and without honesty. That tension is the air tonight. Why veterans stepped forward. First, listen closely along the fence and you will hear a sentence repeated in different accents by people of different ages. We kept our promise, keep yours. These are not men and women who imagine themselves as victims. They remember cold morning parades and endless drills, not as punishments, but as proof they could be relied upon. Many came home to good jobs, strong families and quiet lives. Many did not. The cost of living now makes a pension feel smaller than the speeches promised. Mental health support arrives late and thin. Form letters outnumber face-to-face conversations. For some, the phrase "no veteran left behind" reads like printing on a brochure rather than a policy at work. The anger tonight did not begin with migration. It began with a ledger that never balanced. When hotels were converted at speed and barracks were repurposed at scale, veterans watched something they recognised: the state moving quickly when it chooses to. Contracts are signed overnight, security staff are hired at pace, transport and catering are funded without hesitation. Veterans asked a simple question: if capacity exists to move mountains for a programme launched last month, why does it disappear for those who carried a flag last decade? The answer they heard too often was an apology attached to a waiting list. Most people on this pavement will tell you the same thing. This is not about rejecting the persecuted. It is about refusing to be positioned behind them by default in the country they defended. It is about dignity in the queue. It is about the order in which a nation proves its gratitude. When the leaked words spoke of tearing, veterans heard not just an indictment of immigration policy, they heard a confession about a wider neglect that includes them. The 300,000 gathering. The scale is not a mystery if you've been watching the last several years unfold. Small demonstrations outside converted hotels were treated as local storms. A handful of veterans at a roundabout could be dismissed as a photo opportunity, but small storms join other systems and become weather. The identities of the organisers matter less than the architecture of the anger. Private Facebook groups once used to share reunion dates turned into notice boards. WhatsApp threads originally meant for charity raffles became logistics lists for transport. Coach companies took bookings and did not ask what the destination was for. This is how gatherings grow. Not through a single command, but through 1,000 low murmurs that agree with one another. In the city centres, the scenes looked familiar to those who have watched other protest flags, chants, banners. At Barracks gates, the details were different. Medals glinted. A man in his 70s walked with his granddaughter at his side and a beret in his pocket so it would not blow away. A woman in her 30s, still carrying the posture of formation, leaned heavily on a cane and stared through the fence for a long time without speaking. A group of younger veterans, some with fresh scars, stood back from the cameras and kept their eyes on the doors. If a chant began to sound harsh, these were often the people who stilled it with a look. The crowd knew this was not a place for triumph, it was a place for testimony.
The MP for Knowsley believes anger here had been fuelled by misinformation.
Inside the fence, fear and uncertainty. The men living behind the wire did not choose this accommodation. They did not choose the town or the street or the anger beyond the gate. Some spent months crossing borders to reach this country and took the first available bed. This too is a truth that belongs in the same frame. The residents have their own ledger of loss. They left behind parents, siblings and lovers. They walked through checkpoints with their eyes lowered. They slept under bridges and in train stations. When they hear footsteps outside at night, it does not take much for old memories to flood back. Tonight, they listen to a crowd that is not here for them specifically, but is here because of a system that includes them. And that is frightening enough. Charity workers speak softly. Police officers keep their stance open. A liaison officer who served in the forces recognises patches and regimental ties in the crowd and nods at familiar names. He asks the protesters to give him the space to do what he can do best, which is make sure that no one crosses a line that cannot be uncrossed. He is frank. The migrants inside did not start this story. Neither did the veterans. The story was set in motion by decisions made at desks many miles from here. His job is to keep strangers from paying for those decisions with injuries they did not earn. It is in moments like this that the story becomes less about headlines and more about people. Imagine being the person responsible for calming this crowd. Police officer, veteran or resident behind the wire. What choice would you make first to keep everyone safe? Share your instinct in the comments. It tells us how people think these standoffs should be handled. Subscribe if you want to see what decisions come next from those with real power, and tap like if you believe stories like this must stay in the public eye. What the government says and what the crowd hears when the capital lights burn late in corridors that are never cold. A podium is placed. An official steps up with prepared text. Gratitude to veterans is voiced first. Commitment to compassion is voiced second. Phrases like firm and fair and safe and legal are lined up beside words like cohesion and community. The leaked sentence that mentioned tearing is softened, then wrapped in context, then presented as part of a wider effort to assess and improve. There will be reviews, there will be audits, there will be task forces, there will be pilots, there will be pilots of pilots. The charts are ready to show progress. Out here, the lights flicker in the wind and the sound system fails when the generator coughs. The crowd listens to the speech on phones. Heads shake, not because there is no sympathy in the words, but because the distance between the promise and the pavement has become too long to cross. Those who keep diaries could list the dates on which similar paragraphs were read and the dates on which nothing changed in their lives. People do not need perfection. They need proof. They need the first door in the first hallway of the first barracks to be guarded by a policy that exists on more than paper. They need mental health appointments to land before crises turn into funerals. They need one person with authority to stand at these gates and say, not we are looking into it, but we have fixed it, with receipts to show it is true. A fabric under strain. Commentators try to divide this night into neat sides, left and right, locals and newcomers, compassion and fear. But at these barracks gates, those lines dissolve. A veteran in a faded jumper tells a reporter he will not stand by if anyone inside is threatened. Nearby, a mother holds a thermos for shivering officers because she knows no one trains for shifts like this. And at the back of the crowd, a man who arrived in Britain 3 winters ago clutches a cardboard sign, "Safety for them and for me." The camera does not linger on him. His presence complicates the narrative, but he belongs to the truth of this moment. The struggle outside is not really with the people behind the fence. It is with the forces that place 2 groups with different wounds into a single arena and then stepped away. The leaked warning that spoke of tearing the United Kingdom apart has become a chant, a headline, a hashtag, a symbol. People who disagree on taxes and schools and every election in recent memory are repeating the same words, not because they share politics, but because they share pressure. They feel it in ways a briefing cannot soften. School places gone before the term begins, GP appointments booked months in advance, emergency rooms overflowing. Rents escalating until familiar neighbourhoods become impossible to afford. One nurse told her manager she was fine and then cried quietly in a supply closet before returning to the ward. A landlord sold his only rental flat because complaints and costs turned into a second full-time job. A council leader begged for support and received a spreadsheet. Multiply these stories by 1,000, then by another 1,000, and the language of tearing becomes not alarmism but understatement. The veterans who gathered tonight understand what happens when small failures accumulate. In the armed forces, no crack is too minor to check, because one overlooked weakness can cost lives. Out here they see cracks widening into fractures, and they are warning the country before the structure fails. A knife-edge night. There are nights when policing is simply enforcement, lines drawn, orders issued, shields up, but tonight is careful, human, fraught. Officers recognise former comrades in the crowd, exchanging brief nods that carry entire histories. Shared memories of foreign deployments ease tension for a heartbeat, but old bonds are not enough to guide a crowd of thousands. A flare arcs overhead and lands too close to the front line. The chant that began as pleading, "Help your own first," sharpens into something that could cut. The order from the command van is calm, almost whispered. Helmets on, shields raised. Hold the line, not as a wall, but as a plea. Most protesters understand the risk instantly. A woman in her 40s steps forward and ushers people back, using her voice like a lighthouse through fog. A man in his 60s creates a narrow path so a few who feel trapped can breathe again. The tension does not break, but it bends just enough. The lesson sits heavy in the air. Any story that centres on a fence carries danger. Fences ask to be tested. They separate fear from misunderstanding. One push too far and the night changes from symbolic to violent. The police know this. The veterans know this. The migrants inside feel it most of all. A country watching itself. And this is not one location. It is a pattern repeating across the map. Cameras capture cues in northern towns where old drill squares now hold temporary accommodation. In a coastal city, volunteers turn a church car park into a makeshift clothing bank because men inside do not own proper coats. In market towns and suburbs, shopkeepers stand outside their darkened windows, tracking sirens instead of customers. Teenagers film short clips, posting them before they even understand what they are capturing. The kind of footage that can shape national opinion before breakfast. Crowds on bridges unfurl banners reading, "We kept our promise, keep yours." 100 miles away, others lift signs that say, "Help the people who helped you." Different words, the same sentiment. Gratitude crossed with grievance. Loyalty mixed with disappointment. For years, Britain has tried to sort these emotions into categories, arguments and party manifestos. But emotions are not paperwork. They leak into the streets. Numbers without names. Officials have data for everything: arrivals, placements, decisions processed, removals completed, veteran housing grants, mental health referrals. In parliamentary debates, the numbers always sound reassuring, but life does not happen in averages. A mother turning off her heating for the third night in a row does not warm to statistics about improved outcomes. A former sergeant who waited months for therapy does not feel supported by a chart showing national progress. An asylum seeker reading an automated email addressed to "Dear Sir" or "Madam" does not feel respected by a policy promising integration. Tonight, people want proof, not percentages. They want to see a security rota posted at the gate and someone accountable for following it. They want translators available before fear escalates into conflict. They want building standards checked before an inspection report becomes a scandal. They want veterans seen before their names appear in a coroner's file. They want action that exists outside a press release. Until then, every number used to defend the system becomes another number used to question it. Because when a system works, people feel the result long before they hear the announcement and what the cameras miss. Clips move faster than police vans ever will. Some show a veteran stepping between two men, steadying them with nothing more than a voice that has calmed worse moments. Others show a flare skidding across the ground and stopping just short of a wall of shields. And others show only faces, tired, windburned, wrestling with emotions that do not fit into slogans. Depending on which version reaches a screen, this crowd is either a stand for order or a threat to it. The nation scrolls, and its judgment scrolls with it. But the moments that matter most rarely go viral. A ribbon pinned beside a poppy on an old wool coat. A police officer quietly offering water without performing for the camera. A resident inside the barracks whispering into a phone telling his mother he is safe tonight. These images complicate the narrative, and complication is not what this hour rewards. Yet without it, the next spark, the next misstep, the next fearful misunderstanding becomes harder to prevent. Across the country, similar scenes unfold in one town. Volunteers gather gloves and hats for men unprepared for the cold. In another, shopkeepers stand outside their shuttered windows, listening to sirens they stopped counting months ago. Teenagers film short clips for social feeds filled with edits of unrest, each one shaping a story before anyone has time to breathe. On bridges and high streets, banners repeat the same sentiment in different words. We kept our promise. Keep yours. Gratitude and grievance have collided, and no camera can fully explain the weight of that impact. In moments like this, the road ahead splits in ways no one can fully map. One path demands work that cannot be delayed anymore. Real housing, real support, real funding that shows veterans and communities they are finally being taken seriously. Another follows a pattern the country knows too well: promises stretched across reviews and pilot schemes. Pressure quietly building until the next crowd arrives with less patience than the last. And then there is the path that shifts the ground beneath politics itself, where people stop waiting for old institutions to change and start looking elsewhere for someone who will actually listen. No one here can say which direction the country will choose, but the questions rising from these fences, from these faces, will not fade on their own. They will follow the people who stood here tonight into mourning, into headlines, into the next decision made behind closed doors. So let me ask you, which way do you think Britain is leaning now and why? Tell me in the comments. If you want to stay with this story as it unfolds, subscribe so you do not miss what comes next. And tap like if you want this to reach others asking the same questions.